introduce to you my friend and colleague, Mohamad Machine-Chian, who is a senior research scholar here at the Center for Governance and Markets at the Graduate School of Public and International Affairs here at the University of Pittsburgh. Mohamad, if I may, it comes to us via Tehran, Iran, where he worked for many years as a very prominent policymaker, policy scholar, and editor. And he was, during his time in Iran, he's just joined us very recently, he serves in a range of positions, leading think tanks, working for ministries on economic reform. He has really seen efforts to change Iran from the inside out. And in addition to his reform efforts, he has served as an editor-in-chief of several important newspapers and magazines in Iran. He was the first economy and policy editor, position he served since 2018. He's editor-in-chief of his own media conglomerate, bourgeois.ir. He's been the editor-in-chief of Eco-Iran Television and many others. But it is his efforts to try to promote change inside of Iran that has brought him here to Pittsburgh. And I'll let him tell his story of how he came here and why he's here. But it's very unfortunate that people like Mohamad do not have a space inside of Iran. It's a blessing for us to have him here with us in our community. But as we've seen, Iran is full of tumult and turmoil these days, and I thought that there would be no better person prepared to explain what's going on and why than Mohamad Machine-Chian. So without further ado, sir, the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody, and allow me to thank you for being here. It means a lot to me. And thank you for giving me this opportunity. I'm going to talk about the unrest in Iran, the ongoing unrest in Iran, and we're going to cover what happened to that started all this unrest, and I will try to provide a couple of examples of historical, contemporary, and otherwise examples to put it in perspective on why such a relatively, because a lot of, according to our policymakers, our politicians, a lot of big things, big international things, and domestic things as well, were going on, and compared to that, the life of just a younger isn't typically considered too much, I'm afraid. But that moved people, and moved people at a time of great financial difficulty. The country is in bad shape when it comes to its financial situation. And if we have time, I'm going to touch on that as well. But people came to the streets not because of the current financial crisis, not because of the hyperinflation, and people are really hurting from all of those things. But they came to talk about their basic fundamental human rights and defend Masa Amini's human rights and basic fundamental rights. And this, to me, it means a lot. I'm proud to be one of those people, to be honest with you. And here's a very small, very short disclaimer. Usually I'm trying to be impartial, neutral, and fair, and I assure you I will continue to be fair, will be committed to the truth as always, but I am biased because I am one of those people that are getting beaten and killed in the streets. So there is a bias there. There's no doubt. Let there be no doubt. But to begin with, I'm requesting that you have a look at this. This is a short video, just over a minute, and there's no gore, there's no blood, and I've tried my best to choose something as something becoming of an academic setting. This isn't sensational, this isn't, I assure you, but, and I'll explain why having a look at it that this matters, because otherwise, some of you may not even believe me, or you may think I'm just an angry activist. I assure you, this is not the case. So I invite you to have a look yourself, and I hope you can muster the stomach to see it through. Since she has a heart condition, by the way. And these are, by the way, these are the mothers. And I think it's worth pointing out that these girls are not out and about having a good time with the boyfriend, or they're not drunk, they're not drunk. That is not to say, I'm not passing judgments, I'm just pointing out the obvious. They are out with their mothers. And the mothers are standing in front of the van saying, she's sick, she has a condition. And the tragedy in this scene, if you ask me, is that those mothers, they probably at some point, they also had been there. Chances are they had been there when they were girls, because this thing have been going on for almost half a century, for 40 plus years. And I can go back and talk about, if we have time, maybe I will tell you about how this thing came to be and became law of the land and has been enforced for so many years. Suffice it to say that, and because I think this is an interesting matter.
Could you explain to us what's going on here, just in case some of us aren't familiar with this context?
That's a very good idea. Actually, I assumed everybody, but you're right. This is police. This is morality police. This is morality police, and they are everywhere. They are everywhere, and every major street and every square. And if they deem that you're indecent and you're insulting the public dignity, they're going to grab you, they're going to arrest you, and there are consequences. And I personally know, and by the way, again, another disclaimer, I'm providing an opinion of a man. I can never imagine myself in those women's shoes. That is not what I'm trying to say, but I know a lot of people close to me, my relatives, my friends, that have been there, have been grabbed, and people of prominent social standing, lawyers, doctors, and I'm not saying that anyone that doesn't happen to be a lawyer is deserving of something like this. But what I'm saying is, in any case, they're going to grab you, and they're going to bring those people to certain concentration camps inside the city, in which they are going to re-educate you, to cure you of your indecency, basically. That is the idea. And Mahsa Amini died during one of those classes. She collapsed, and they were trying to re-educate.
Can you tell us a little bit about her?
Absolutely, yes, of course. I'm going to tell you about her, but before I'm going to, because I'm going to disconnect this, let me show you a picture of Mahsa. I'm not sure, maybe you've seen this picture. I don't know. But this is maybe an hour before she was arrested. So she was arrested like this. This is as indecent as she was. And I assure you, some who may think maybe we have different standards, maybe our value system, our culture is deem something like this indecent. I assure you that's not the case. And not only us, I have many Muslim friends from even more conservative countries. And I assure you, they will say the same thing. This is not insulting in any way, even though if it was our value system, I would have things to say against it. Having backward values is no defense, I don't think. But in this case, this is not the case. Yes, and she was grabbed maybe an hour after this picture. She was traveling to Tehran with her brother. She was with her brother, as those girls that were with their mother. So let me. So I'm going to tell you briefly what happened to Mahsa Amini, and then I'm going to give you some context, hopefully to be able to put it in perspective. She was 22 years old, as many of you have already heard, and she was traveling to Tehran with her brother. And as mentioned, that is how she looked. She was grabbed in Haqqani station. Haqqani station is a very short walk from my house in Tehran. And when I came to PIT, they asked me to provide a picture of my country because we're so diverse, and to have it on display. And the picture I provided was from a park in Haqqani, maybe 2 minutes from where she was arrested. And where I lived, I'm ashamed to say, I have seen in Banak Square, one of the central hubs in Tehran, and Tehran is a big city, more than 10 million people population. And I have seen hundreds of times, hundreds of girls being grabbed, being pushed into those vans. And I stood there, as did many others, helplessly. And at times, people tried to help. Sometimes it led to violence, obviously not by people, but those people resist, of course, because they are ruining their lives, because you have a record and you're arrested. And you have to go through a lot of things, and it can be a gateway crime, by the way, because if you resist, you can have other accusations, attacking an officer of the law, that sort of things. And the judge can be harder on you, of course. So she was grabbed, and she was beaten in the process to the head multiple times, according to eyewitnesses that were with other girls. They also have been beaten during the process. And she wasn't feeling good. They didn't care. And I chose those clips, and a recurring theme in those clips is the fact that many of those girls are saying that they have a health condition. It doesn't change a thing, because those officers, that is the first thing they're used to hear. ignore it right away. And I can go back because they have evolved over the past 4 decades. Because to begin with, if a young man, young woman would walk in the streets, they would question you, what is your relationship? If you're not legally married, you could get into trouble. And so people, boyfriend, girlfriends, or merely dating, people had their stories straight. They knew each other's father name, mother name, that sort of things. And so they evolved over time, and they don't pay attention anymore. They just grab you and take you to a station, and then they're going to process you. Those people aren't concerned with these things. So she fell down and she was rushed to a hospital. They say she was rushed to a hospital. We have a lot of cases of people dying in custody of negligence, people who had health conditions in prison, diagnosed conditions, but nonetheless, they died. We just lost a poet in prison. He died. His organs failed, and they say he wasn't in good shape. In any case, her story went viral. A lot of people started to paying attention. People started to posting online, talking about it, providing similar examples, posting pictures and videos like this, and there are many of these. And for example, those mothers, it's just a few months ago, if I'm not mistaken. I remember that distinctly, because at that time, some officials said, "Oh, women, overreacting. They're just going to be educated." But now we know those mothers knew. They knew better. They knew what's going to happen to their daughters. So she went to a hospital and they said she's alive. And then they said, well, she's alive, but she's in a coma, not alive. And the whole country held their breath for 2 days for her life. For all intents and purposes, she was dead already. And there's a pattern in this. I'm not sure. Some of you may remember a couple of years ago. One morning we woke up. We heard that a passenger airplane, an international flight, Ukrainian flight, going to Canada, fell from the sky. And same thing. They denied it. They lied about it. They said it was just technical difficulties, and all sorts of officials, pilots, what have you. They came, they did interviews, came to TV, and justified it, explained it in details. And it would have been done by then if it was a domestic flight, but it wasn't. And the intelligence community started talking. And by the way, there were some footage, some videos of seeing the airplane was shot in the sky. But their reaction was trying to find the person who recorded that video. They said it was just made up with special effects. They're saying all those things here as well. It may be hard to believe, but that is exactly our official position. Our foreign minister, still in New York, he's saying that everything you see is just special effect. They're just making these things up. And this is the official position, the party line. And they said the same thing. The intelligence community said, in the case of the airplane, they said there's probably foul play. They were very thorough. It took them a few days. And in all those days, Revolutionary Guard generals, officials, ministers, the president, they all denied it. And then everybody, the whole intelligence community arrived to a consensus that there was foul play. The plane was shot by rockets, not one, not two. And then they said, well, you know, it was just human error. It was a mistake and it was not intentional. And we are taking action. We are going to correct things and that sort of things. However, here, in this case, in case of Mahsa Amini, she didn't have anybody. She was just an Iranian person, a woman at that. And they didn't apologize, they didn't, and they haven't moved an inch until this very moment. And they defended it, everybody, MPs, ministers, and the best they came up with was that, well, you know, you cannot fault the police for enforcing the law. Maybe we have to look at the law and maybe, well, we will do that. They didn't say any mistakes were made. Even if they did, it wouldn't count for much. And what I'm trying to arrive at is that this was not an isolated incident. This was not an unfortunate accident or a rare occasion. We have many of these occasions. Not everybody dies, but many people, millions of people have been incarcerated and beaten and so on. And this could not be avoided, by the way. I don't think. It was waiting to happen, in my opinion. So Iranian people, if I had to sum it up, are outraged about a systematic, organized assault on their basic fundamental human rights and their dignity, I think. And people are really protesting against cruel and unusual punishment by any civilized standards, in my opinion. And this has been done over decades to the most harmless members of our society, most defenseless members of our society. And some of you may be surprised that, well, you know, it's not a democratic country. Well, it is democratic to a certain extent, at least as the appearance of it, but there's no due process, there's no rule of law, and so cruelty, brutality cannot really come as a surprise. And I would agree with you. And many of us know how it feels to get beaten, for our dignity, our freedom to be taken away. However, most of us, it's usually when you say something, you write something, you do something, and usually you decide to become a blogger, a researcher, a journalist, a public intellectual, something on those lines. And even then, there are ways. It's a razor edge to walk upon, but you come up with all sorts of inventive ways to navigate that very difficult path. And some people survive. And it's a story for another day, but we have all sorts of ways to cope with this situation. But in the case of Mahsa Amini, she did nothing wrong, and her only crime was just being a woman in that case. So yes, there is a great deal of cruelty and brutality and violence against people, but mostly for doing something. But in case of women, there's a great deal of violence focused on them, only on account of being women. And I don't think there's any excuse for that. So I told you about, now let me tell you about a little about the current situation, how it's going. It's almost 2 weeks now, 13 days since it started. And so far, I think we have less than 100 casualties, which by our standards is very contained, very tame. However, I have to point out that, and let me give you an example first. Protests of 2019, just a few years ago, Reuters news agency confirmed 1,500 kills, and I'm mentioning major Western news agency because we have other sources and other statistics. I don't want to go into that. So, yes, 100 kills so far, especially in 13 days, is a low number. However, there are a couple of things here. First, it's just the beginning, and there's no saying where you're going to end up. And second, for a few days now, they have started using live rounds, and the number of casualties went up, and they continue to do that. But of course, they are being more careful. They are better equipped compared, for example, to 2009 unrest. Some of you may remember the botched election, Ahmadinejad election, during which the whole country turned upside down, and they were not as equipped, as ready as they are now these days. They have all sorts of air guns, BB guns, and things that really hurt, but doesn't necessarily kill you. Although we have, for example, a high number of people going blind because of the short-range BB guns that. And the third thing is that the families of the casualties are under immense pressure to say it was of natural causes or it was an accident. Including, by the way, the family of Mahsa Amini. They said she had a pre-existing condition, and her family very courageously denied it. They said, no, she was healthy. She had no problem, and we know even if she did, it would make no difference to them. But in any case, they were very courageous. Another girl, she's, if I'm not mistaken, she's even younger. She was just killed. She was active in the social media too. We have a video of her. I'm not going to show it. Just minutes before getting shot and killed. Her family was under immense pressure to say that she had a heart attack. And her father, her mother, they accepted that, but her sisters speaking out and saying this. A lot of other families. So the casualties number may be much higher than the confirmed kills. And at the moment, we don't know that. So at the moment, we have widespread support by all groups in the country. And this is unprecedented. So usually in these cases, celebrities, athletes, especially the A-listers, they're very careful because to understand this better, you should look at it this way. Radio and television, according to the Constitution, is owned by the government and has a monopoly by the government. Cinema is basically owned by the government. And there are private investors, but private investors cannot go in business without all sorts of licenses and loops and loops to go through. So basically, it's impossible to be in any business. It's a planned economy. It's a centrally very heavily regulated and controlled economy in every way. The sports are the same. Sports are controlled directly by the government, planned by the government, and for example, Iran is big on soccer, football. And even those clubs are owned, are the budget is coming from the public budget, which is crazy in my opinion, but that's the way things are. So usually actors, actresses, they're very careful about these things. And whenever there's an election, they're called upon and they come and shake hands and do their bare minimum. Sometimes some of them are going another extra mile, and they usually end up being more successful. But in this case, a lot of people, even those actors and actresses, typically known to be close to the government, always present when the supreme leader is speaking, that sort of things. Even they are speaking against the regime. And so there's a meaningful, tangible change in mood, the whole country. And of course, and people played a very important part in this because people are pressuring celebrities to take sides. And they're saying, are you with us or against us? And so silence is no longer really an option for our celebrities. In that case, I think something very spontaneous, very interesting thing coming out. So how the unrest is going? After usually, I think the government expected the unrest people to get tired, to go to their homes. And they have tried a few different tactics. They've tried restraint, didn't really work. People became courageous, started talking back to the officials, the officers. And that's not a good thing because you can, if people go beyond that point and start talking back and are not scared anymore of the officials and officers, it becomes very difficult in the future to control these people. Another thing was brute force. They did that. People reacted violently to it. And they have smear campaigns, fear tactics, all sorts of things. And they circulate rumors and try to say things against people, especially, for example, this girl that just died. You can find all sorts of horrible news about her. And just at a glance, you understand this is uncalled for. Even if she is guilty of everything they're saying, she just died. It's not really tasteful to say something. But it is obvious why those news pop up everywhere. They have been trying to take charge of the narrative. Obviously, all the mass media platforms in Iran are more or less, even then, they are, although to their credit, speaking out, but very carefully. However, they kind of have to repeat what the official position is. There's no escaping that. But they have been questioned. A lot of journalists are have been arrested. Some of my colleagues, people I hired, are, as we speak, in jail. Women, of course. They reported that made Mahsa Amini's story public. She's in jail. She's in solitary jail. We don't know what's happening to her at the moment. They cannot release her at this point because she comes out. She's a hero. They don't want that sort of heroes at the moment. But we see a lot of unprecedented stuff because people are beginning to remove the scarves. Well, of course, in some cases, torching scarves, but I mean, normalizing that sort of things. And it is, again, I'm providing a man's perspective in this case. And as men, we're always scared because our women, they're so courageous and sometimes you're terrified of what they're doing, because for all these years, they just try to let this scar slide. They know what they're going to deal with, but they're doing it. They're trying to normalize, and more so now, more than ever. A lot of people of very prominent positions, again, usually very careful about these things, are speaking out harsh terms against the regime. What else? Oh, by the way, there are reports of the riot police being very tired because these are official positions by the head of the judiciary, that sort of things, saying that they haven't slept in days because they have a limited number of, it is large, but nonetheless, it's an 84 million country. The population of Iran is currently 84 million. And usually when there's an unrest in Mashhad, they send reinforcements from Tehran and vice versa. In this case, there's unrest everywhere. And they were expecting things to calm down after a week. It didn't. Now we're finishing the second week. But yesterday, an imam, by the way, all people, said something, governor, Imam of Chabahar, it's a southern region in Iran, and has a Baluch and Arab population, mostly, and other, of course, minorities. He declared, and imams, they have not only our flavor of Islam is political Islam. So imams, their position is not only religious, but also political. And he's a prominent person. He is Sunni. In that region, it's a Sunni region. He said that the governor of that region had raped a 15-year-old girl. So now unrest in southern regions has become a whole different thing. And of course, again, I'm sure at this point you can guess what they're doing. Denying, lying, no, of course. If I want to sum it up, the whole attitude, the whole behavior, it's a greater good sort of way of looking at things. So did the governor really rape a 15-year-old girl? Look at this. Just calm down. We're talking about this whole regime. We are trying to be a compass, a beacon. Other Muslim majority societies are looking up at us and think about what can happen. This is very tricky situation. Let's not talk about it. We will, in due time, in the fullness of time, we of course will study this matter carefully. If he is guilty, we will get rid of him silently. This will not repeat. That sort of approach, you know, think about the big picture. So naturally they are lying, they are denying it, but it is beyond denial. At this point, they have no credibility whatsoever. In other news, the internet still is caught up. However, in previous unrest, they would cut off internet entirely. You didn't have access to anything. But then they saw that this is not feasible and cannot continue for an extended amount of time because banks cannot work, cannot function, even government agencies cannot function in that situation. So they started a national internet initiative and in tandem with the Chinese government. And we have a multi-decade agreement with the Chinese and with the Russian to cooperate on issues. One of the main ones with the Chinese government is the national internet, basically. They call it the Protective Initiative, PATISIONET. And they want to protect people from harmful aspects of the internet, of course. So this time around, they are more informed, they're very more careful. Mostly internet is cutting off at certain hours and certain locations. So if there's unrest in some place in particular, everything will be cut off. entirely. But in other places, if you have access to home internet cable, it may work, but the mobile operators are out. And even then, if you want to access websites or services that are on the domestic network, they may work. Although some of those services may go out even at this point, but still, they're working on it. They throttling, so if you want to go to a Supreme Leader website, it works, it's fast. If you want to go to, say, I don't know, a news agency, to the BBC or something like that, it takes half an hour. Things like that. And they have banned the remainder of the social media platforms. So Telegram, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, all of those already have been banned. Some of them by 2009 after the botched election, but some of them later. But they banned everything. LinkedIn is banned. Instagram was the last major social network that Iranian people used. That is banned. What else? Viber, WhatsApp is banned now. And they said to begin with, they said this is a temporary measure, but they're talking about, no, it's going to be permanent. And app stores are banned. So you cannot download because people started downloading VPNs and other alternatives. People say Signal works or say Google Meet works, that sort of things. And they don't want the headache anymore. So yes, there's a limited access to internet, but most major services isn't working. So let's go back to what happened to Mahsa after she was rushed to the hospital. This is how it all started. Parents rushed to the center, to the concentration center, to get their daughters because they couldn't take it anymore. And the thing about crowds is that, especially if you happen to be the jailer, facing a large number of people, they panicked, whatever. They became violent against ordinary, I mean, mostly middle-aged people with no records, no tendency towards violence. They just want their daughter, which has done nothing. It became violent. They used tear gas against them. Pepper spray has been especially effective in this unrest. So that caused an outrage. People went to the hospital where Mahsa was hospitalized, and they thought she was alive. But the word got out. Doctors, we have courageous doctors. They said, look, there was nothing could be done. By the time she arrived here, nothing could be done for her. She was pretty much gone. And some actually documents were leaked out of that, CT scans, that sort of things. So nothing could be done there. And no, this was not a heart attack. No, it was not of natural causes. It was not an accident. This was brute force through the head. And evidence for it, blood from here. Very, very difficult thing to talk about. So people gathered around the hospital, again, became violent. And people started at that point talking back to the officers and the authorities. And at first, they didn't know what to do. They were trying to keep it calm and everything. But then they said, hell with it, started hitting and shooting and that sort of things. Okay, how much time do we?
Maybe just 5 more minutes then.
Okay, then I'll briefly say what can come out of this? I think at the moment, and by the way, another detail worth mentioning is that the supreme leader so far hasn't said a word. And this is curious.
Is he alive?
That is actually a very good question to ask, because he is alive, yes, but
Can you just tell folks who may not know who the Supreme Leader is?
oh yes, of course. Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei, he's been in charge for nearly 30 years now, and we have the same thing. Christopher Hitchens often talked about this, that tyrannies, ironically, to a disturbing level, look alike. And they have very similar characteristics. One of them being, for example, in North Korea, every now and then you'll hear that no one has seen Kim Jong-un for 2 weeks. What's going on? And is he alive? Is he healthy? Same thing is happening to the Supreme Leader as we speak. He was absent from the public eye for a while, and then, so there was, he had to meet with the guardian council, with one of the high councils, and he didn't, so it became news. Some officials with good intentions had no idea what he was saying, said, oh, yes, we were hoping to see the Supreme Leader, but unfortunately, he didn't have time for us. It became newsworthy. After a while, they announced that, yes, he has met with some people. Then reporters in America, close to the regime, and they have, when you have oil money, you have a lot of people in your pocket, and we know that. They started saying, no, he's recovering from an operation. Nobody in Iran knew, but some reporters had this too in America. And I'm not accusing anybody. And so apparently he is recovering from an operation, but we haven't seen him. And there are speculations as to why he is not saying anything. Some people say, oh, look, what good did that do when he talked back in 2009? Because he did speak, and it did become even more violent from the government. People, they started to being harder on people. But so at this point, it may enrage people. So there's no point almost in him being speaking. But on the other hand, it is odd that he hasn't showed himself so far. And it is a curious time because we know of his illness. He is a very old man. If he happens to die at this juncture, and by the way, the legitimacy of the regime is under question by everybody who's anybody in Iran at the moment. But that aside, if he dies at this moment, there is a serious problem with legitimacy of who is going to, because they are trying to make it into a hereditary thing, making it into yes, with no background in I think he has always worked in the background. He's always been in the background. But in any case, one more point and I'll finish, and that is why this matters and why people should care. I just want to raise a couple of points. One being that a normal Iran, a democratic Iran, would benefit, I assure you, the whole world. Because the current regime is, I think at this point, it's beyond any shadow of doubt that they're troublemakers. Whether they are pursuing nuclear weapon or otherwise, that's beside the point. And whatever government comes after the current regime, I assure you about a couple of things, because if people have anything to say about the next government, and the next one cannot be a tyranny, I assure you, these people, they would not accept another tyranny. And people would never accept meddling in other countries' affairs, Lebanon, Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, and other countries. This whole thing, because Islamic Republic has two main characteristics, maybe more, but these two are very core values. They deem these very important, and there's no real justification for any of it. First one is the hostility towards Israel. And at this point, people inside the government, loyal to the government, and by government I mean the whole regime, not just the cabinet, are questioning, wait a minute, why are we enemies with Israel? What is exactly our problem with Israel? No, I mean beyond cabinet, everybody. But members of the parliament, people of high standing, and they're asking, wait a minute, why are we enemies with them? They're, people of Abrahamic religion. We have no problem with that. They have a much bigger problem with, people, atheists, that sort of things, Jewish people, respectively. And we don't have any conflicting interests, and this is great. And the cost is astronomical. And people hate this because people cannot fathom why we're enemies. And we have a lot of Iranian people in Israel. The second one is hijab. Exactly hijab. And I'm not talking about, I'm not going back thousands of years in our history, because if I go, that's a crazy story. The number of our goddesses, way before we were praying to Mitra, is longer than the beard of the Ayatollah. Maternalism still lives on in many of our culture. Many of our culture is maternalistic. So women has always been so. I'm not talking about, we have women warriors and generals and admirals 1,000 years before the word admiral was invented. So, but no, I'm not talking about that. Recent history, our grandmothers, our mothers, with and without hijab, lived shoulder to shoulder, no problem. So in our culture, our value system, this is a non-issue, and people don't understand, why are you doing this? I have an uncle. He's a constitutional lawyer, high-standing, prominent lawyer, professor in one of the best law schools in Iran. And he just published a public letter saying that we do not know, that was the gist of his letter, we do not know how to speak with you, how to reason with you. And this is an expert of administrative law and constitutional law. So he's not too young, too idealist, too quick to say something you're unreasonable, and he has flourished in that system, by the way. But the current regime has taken these values as core values. Without it, it will not be the same. So they are resistant. They're not backing out of it, and they are not willing to change. They've made it clear. So at this point, they're hoping that unrest to die off eventually. They're trying to just kill fewer people if possible, if not, whatever. And so I'll finish with that. Thank you.
So do you have any questions?
We have a few from the online audience.
Yes, so let's go to our online guests.
The first question is, can you touch on sanctions a little and how that may or may not be leading to a more conservative government there? Would lifting sanctions pave the way for greater human rights and reform?
That's a complicated issue. Personally, I would prefer to go into that in a different setting, hopefully a little bit farther from this. At the moment, it's very difficult to talk about it. And however, as far as human rights, because we're talking about human rights here, as far as human rights, the situation in human condition hasn't changed meaningfully with or without an agreement. Before or after an agreement, we already had an agreement. It didn't change much. However, as far as people's, I'll say this, sanctions hurt ordinary people most of the time, more than the regime. This is very unfortunate, but this is how they are designed. I think sanctions can be smarter, can be designed better, and can be enforced better. But the way they enforced it, the regime had so many alternatives to go around sanctions, but people couldn't. That was the issue. And sanctions, if enforced properly, if enforced entirely, they can stop them then and there. So they can have an impact. However, half-baked sanctions, not enforced really. The European Union, their heart wasn't really into these sanctions, and they were willing to do whatever. They played the gray area, basically. So if the European Union is not cooperating, if China isn't cooperating, if Russia isn't cooperating, and they have all sorts of offshore accounts and companies, and in Europe, in Asia, a lot of places in Asia. Unfortunately, it wasn't enforced well, it wasn't designed well, and did hurt people more than the government.
Arash Ram says, great to see you here in the US, Mohamad Jan. What are the stakes here? What happens if these protests don't succeed? Will there be any hope left for Iran?
That is a very good question. I think there is hope. I will point out that the frequency of these unrests have become shorter and shorter. After 2009, the way they handled it with iron fist, some people thought there cannot be any more protests because, look, some of the founding members of the revolution became excommunicated during that thing. I mean, not just ordinary people. Some of them are still in house arrest since 2000. Two of them, in fact, two presidential candidates are still in house arrest. But we had unrest in 2016, 2018, 2019, 2020, and now it's become more and more frequent. And this time, people have gone an extra mile. People trying to normalize a measure of freedom. And I think it becomes increasingly difficult to go back to the situation before these unrests. So I think there is hope.
We do have another question, but
I just wanted to, what was the, introduce yourself first. Oh, sorry, Asafash. I just wanted to know your website, the writing for your journal. What was the name of this?
Oh, I worked for many publications. However, most of them, all of them, have been in Persian. However, here I am beginning to write for English publications, and hopefully you will. I would encourage you to follow CGM's website, and surely you will find. I think there's an effort to put everybody's publications there. Thank you.
another question we have here is, can you speak to the Kurdish minority and region in Iran? What of its relation to the continued bombings of positions in the semi-autonomous northern Iraqi region?
Yeah, this is a good question. I should probably point out that Mahsa Amini happened to be Kurd. She was Kurd. But it's not, and this is, I think, worth pointing out that the unrest, this is not men versus women. This is not a class struggle. This is not a gender war. you cannot find a man in Iran who says, well, this is not my fault. And today, actually, it was a beautiful protest in a university. It becomes, and they, by the way, they canceled all the classes. Classes were supposed to become in person, but has become online. However, we don't have internet, so it doesn't really work. In any case, people are still in universities, and people were protesting, and men were protesting. That the slogan of this whole unrest is "Zan Zindagi Azadi," 3 beautiful words in Persian: woman, life, freedom. This is what everybody is repeating. But today, men were shouting "Zan Zindagi Azadi," and women were saying "Mard Abadi," and I forget the third one. But women were encouraging men to continue that shout, and it was beautiful. And if I'm not mistaken, they were dentistry students, and a lot of teachers, professors have already resigned. A lot of students are increasingly protesting and so forth. I hope that's. Oh, I forgot about the Kurdish aspect. What I wanted to say is that immediately Turkish people, for those of us who may not know, Iran is formed with a lot of ethnicities. We have all sorts of ethnicities. We have Fars people and Arab people and Turkmen and Kurd and Baluch and Gilaki and so many you never even heard of the name. But this unrest had no ethnic undertone to it. Turkish people were shouting their solidarity, as did Fars, as did Baluch, as did Arab, as did everybody else in between.
We have one final question from our online audience, which is, if the protests do succeed, how do you think the structure of the government would change?
That is a very good question also, and a very hard one at that. And at the moment, most of us don't think that far, but I think it's probably time. And there have been efforts, by the way, to, for example, work on a future constitution that can unite everybody with different intellectual persuasions. But a couple of things is obvious so far. It cannot be another hereditary tyranny. It should be constitutional. It should be limited government. It should be democratic. Religion, it should be secular. This has been acknowledged by everybody, including very religious people, because what Islamic Republic did in Iran is maybe, probably, to my understanding, definitely, irreparably damaged religion in Iran. Because people see religion and government entangled together with the same thing. And for that reason, especially religious people want the future government to be secular. Leave our religion out of it. We don't want an Ayatollah in charge of the politics of the country. And it happens in other aspects as well. They are trying to, for example, the central bank, the Federal Reserve in Iran, they have created a religious part to it. They're just introducing that. Crazy thing, I'm not going to get into that. So in any case, it should be secular, it should be democratic, it should be constitutional and limited government. This, left and right, everybody, religious and otherwise, agree upon at the moment. And I hope that is the way to go, and that's how we'll proceed.
Do you see that happening?
To be honest with you, not yet, not at this point. However, I cannot deny that new ground has been claimed. That is for sure. And I hope we will never go back, but we are not at the moment at the point of no return. But we have credible sources saying that, for example, there are airplanes reserved just in case the officials and the families had to leave. It's not really likely at this point. It's not anything close, but it is. They are themselves. They themselves, the officials, are just to be careful, just to be on the safe side. They are thinking that far. So that tells you something. Please.
So speaking to this new ground you mentioned, I was listening to a podcast where the host has different people who are voices from the Iranian diaspora within the US and the UK and such. And one of the hosts that he had said that she also felt that there was new ground that Iranians were finding, but she didn't know how successful this round of protests would be because there's not perhaps a central leader like there was in 78, 79 with the first Ayatollah. So I was just kind of curious as to your thoughts on that in terms of the leadership in these protests and moving forward to craft leadership.
That is a good point. I don't think actually this movement is led by very young people. And to put that in perspective, when the revolution of 1979, I think Iran had 34 million population, and now it has 84. So more than twice. And if I'm not mistaken, close to 70% of people today were born after the revolution. And this unrest is led by very young people. And this is, again, official announcements by the head of the judiciary. They are saying that. And they are saying that, by the way, in demeaning tone. They say, well, it's just 17, 18-year-olds, and they should know better. Their parents should talk to them. And in another occasion, it has been said by the head of the judiciary that we should grab them and speak with them, and so they understand what's right and wrong. And these people, I think, beyond the generation of our grandfathers, grandmothers, fathers, and mothers, who really needed a leader, who needed especially a religious figure to tell them where to go and what to do. These people don't need that. And I think if we reach a point, they can choose who they want to represent them for a limited time and take the power again from them and give it to another. And to have the right to mistake, to choose wrong people and correct it in the future. And so what I'm saying is, aside from what I think, and I agree with them, by the way, they are very clear in their message that we don't need a leader. And the beautiful thing about this, because we do have leaders, we do have people of prominent status. We do have a prince in exile, the son of the Shah. The Prince Reza Pahlavi lives and is currently in DC. But he is not claiming to be the leader. He acknowledges that he's here only to support people. And that's it. And that's a beautiful thing. And other people also, none of them are saying this modesty. I think it would be arrogant of them to claim position of leadership for those people.
Just a final question here. Can you? I'm trying to understand the scope of the protests, and it seems that from what you have described, the protests several years ago there was 1,500 killed. This time, estimates show less than 100. But on the other hand, it seems that the scope of these protests is much more significant than we saw several years ago. Does this mean that authorities, and what I find so incredible about, and I've talked to you about this, about protesters in Iran, is that unlike, even Belarus or other countries we've seen where mass protests break out, police use truncheons, they hit, they beat, they often take people to police stations where they're tortured. But in Iran, authorities have been so willing to use force on the street that when you go out and you protest, you know you're going to be shot. I mean, 1,500 killed is a huge, live round. It is extremely risky, and they have to use a huge amount of violence to suppress and atomize society. So as we're looking at these protests, how can we interpret the number of deaths? Does it mean that the police are using much more restraint than they had in the past? Does it mean they're more afraid of the people? Or does it mean the protests are not as big? Because we see the people, one of the other things that surprises me is watching people go after all of the security forces. They're attacking the security forces. They're not afraid, despite the huge amounts of force they use against them. I don't know, I'm trying to make sense of all of this, and I don't really know how to.
It is interesting. One thing is that unfortunately we don't have real numbers. They are not transparent at all, saying what really is going on. And hospitals are closely watched, and they cannot provide any numbers. And I am trying to be very conservative when it comes to statistics. So I'm echoing what has been acknowledged in the media inside of Iran. So inside Iran, they're saying, well, yes, it's 76, it's 80, it's playing with those numbers. And those numbers can be completely false. It can be already 1,000 people, so far as I know, but we don't know. The other thing is they are better equipped with non-lethal force. A lot of weapons that harm you and harm you irreparably. I mean, blinding you or using a limb, that sort of thing, but not necessarily kill you. We've had a lot of reports about people being blinded, for example. Another thing, again, they are pressuring families to say it was an accident or it was of natural causes. It was a heart attack, things like that. And they did that to especially those who have been under attention. The girl that just died, very young girl, and they were pressuring the family to say that it was a heart attack. And we've had that before, of course. But a more realistic number, I think, will eventually come out. But it's going to take a few months at least. But they're not really, so far as we can see, we can observe, they haven't been more restrained than before. They have been actually very, because we don't have those very standard operating procedures that they have, for example, in the US. Police in Iran doesn't have very specific things to say. We don't have a Miranda rights. We don't have anything of that sort. If it's resisting, just incapacitated.
Thank you very much. It's such an honor to have you here and speak with us today. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.